All right, today we're going to dig into two really big ideas, plutocracy and partycracy. We're trying to get to the bottom of a question that I think a lot of us have. Who really holds the power?
You ever get that feeling, that the government just isn't listening? It feels like no matter who you vote for, ordinary people just aren't being heard. So what's really going on here?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll tackle that big question of power. Then, we've got to understand a key term, oligarchy. After that, we'll explore two different roads that can lead there, the American style, which is plutocracy, and the European version, partycracy. And finally, we'll talk about why knowing the difference actually matters. A lot.
All right, let's get right into it. The question of power. Look, that feeling that politicians are out of touch, it's not just you. People are pretty disenchanted all over the place, and the source material we're digging into says there's a really specific, systemic reason for that.
Now, the argument here is that this isn't some accident or a simple mistake. It's actually the result of what the source calls two pathological forms of democracy, systems that have been twisted to pull power away from the many and put it right into the hands of a select few. So, before we can really get into those two different paths, we need to get our heads around the destination they both share, and that destination is oligarchy. This is a really old concept, but it's more relevant than ever. Oligarchy, simply put, just means rule by the few. And way back when, the ancient Greeks knew exactly what it was usually for, making money for that small group in charge.
And here's the thing. An oligarchy isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. It can show up in different ways. In a plutocracy, the powerful few are the super wealthy, and their main tool is, you guessed it, private money. But in a partycracy, the power is held by party elites, and their main tool is the power of the state itself. Two different methods, same general idea.
Okay, so let's tackle that first path, American plutocracy. And the source material really zeroes in on the political finance system in the US as a textbook example of how this whole thing works.
So what is a plutocracy? Well, it's a political system where, in practice, it's not really about one person, one vote. Instead, it's a system completely dominated by the massive wealth of a very small, affluent minority.
And this is wild. Check out this quote from a 2014 U.S. Supreme Court decision. They're basically saying that using money to get special access and ingratiation from politicians, that's not corruption. No, they say it's a central feature of democracy. So the legal system itself has kind of baked in the influence of big money.
And you can see the real-world effect right here. After that court ruling got rid of some of the caps on total donations, a single person could legally pump up to $3.6 million into the system in just one 2-year election cycle. That's a staggering amount of influence for one individual.
And if you think that's something, look at this. The concentration of this financial power is just mind-boggling. Back in 2012, just 200 donors, that's 0.000084% of the adult population, they provided about 80% of all the money for the big super PACs. As the source says, it's an unfathomably small portion of Americans calling the shots. I mean, that's really the heart of the plutocracy argument right there. A tiny, tiny group with an outsized voice.
All right, now let's pivot and look at the other side of this coin, European partycracy. The source material shows us how you can get to a pretty similar place, ruled by the few, but through a totally different mechanism, one that's more common in European political systems.
This idea, which the political theorist Giovanni Sartori called partycracy, is basically a party tyranny. It's a system where the real power isn't held by the government or parliament you elect, but it's actually shifted to the back rooms and directorates of the major political parties themselves.
So how does this happen? Well, researchers Katz and Mayer laid out a kind of evolution. Parties start out as mass parties, representing their supporters. Then they become catch-all parties, trying to sell themselves to as many voters as possible. But the final stage is the cartel party. And this is where they stop being representatives of society and instead become almost part of the state itself, all tangled up in the government they're supposed to be keeping in check.
And what do these cartel parties do? Well, they tend to collude with each other to get more state subsidies. Basically, public money. They rig the rules to shut out smaller, challenger parties. And because they're getting their money from the state, not from their members, they become way less responsive to what actual citizens want. Democracy kind of gets turned upside down, redefined as just rulers controlling the ruled.
Okay, so when you put these two ideas, plutocracy and partycracy, side by side, you start to see this really fundamental clash over what democracy is even supposed to be.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly.
It's a head-on collision of legal philosophies. You've got the U.S. Supreme Court saying, hey, restricting money is messing with the marketplace of ideas, and equality isn't really a First Amendment thing. And then you have Brazil's highest court saying the exact opposite, that private campaign money prevents democracy from being a fundamental right. They flat out say if democracy is a right, then plutocracy is a violation of that right. And here's a quote from one of those Brazilian ministers that just pulls no punches. He says, "We do not live in an authentic democracy, but rather a plutocracy." He's not dancing around it. He's naming the system he believes is killing real democracy.
So here's the big takeaway, the thing to really remember. Both plutocracy and partycracy are just different flavors of oligarchy. One uses private money, the other uses state power, but they both undermine democracy. They take different roads to get to a very similar destination, a system that just doesn't listen to most of us.
Look, just being able to see these patterns, to name them, is a huge first step. But it leaves us with a pretty heavy question. If these are the paths that modern democracies are heading down, where do we go from here?